Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this special episode, former co-director of Artangel Michael Morris and artistic director of Sadler's Wells Alistair Spalding discuss their memories of dancer and choreographer Pina Bausch on the 15th anniversary of her passing.
To mark 15 years since the death of the German choreographer Pina Bausch, Tank has produced a special podcast in which Michael Morris, UK producer of Tanz Theatre of Wuppertal from 1992 to 2012, and Sir Alistair Spalding, director of Sadler's Wells, the company's long-standing London home, reflect on their close relationship with the legendary choreographer.
Today, I'm joined by Sir Alistair Spalding, artistic director and CEO of Sadler's Wells. We're going to be talking about the choreographer Pina Bausch, with whom I worked for 2 decades prior to her sudden death in June 2009 at the age of 69. Alistair, thank you for joining me. I've lost count of the number of times we've visited Wuppertal together over the years. And thanks to those trips, the exceptional international dancers of Tanztheater Wuppertal Pina Bausch have been regular visitors to Sadler's Wells Theatre since it was rebuilt in 1999. Should we go back a little bit further than that?
Yes, well, you can, because I wasn't there. You started much earlier with the company.
Yeah, I mean, it became a sort of addiction, as I think it does to everyone who sees the company. And my addiction with Pina started in 1982 at the old Sadler's Wells, which, if you remember, was the whole building was probably half the size of the stage is now.
It was.
It was tiny, and looking back on it, it was a miracle that Pina Bausch got her 2 shows. Yeah. One was called 1980, which was a very significant year for her, as we'll probably talk about. And the other was called Kontakthof, which means in English, contact yard. Channel 4 were filming it. It was the early days of Channel 4, and Michael Kuster, who was the first commissioning editor of the arts, decided to film it, which helped to fund the presentation. And rumour sort of, if you talk to people about 1982 now, they claim that half the audience walked out. I mean, I saw it 3 nights running, and that really wasn't the case. People were gripped. I had never seen anything like it. I didn't know that this existed, this work which combined so many elements of human experience. I was just completely thunderstruck. When did you first see Pina's work?
Well, I think it must have been 1996. No, actually, it was when the company finally came to London.
Victor.
Yeah.
1999.
Yeah, and but just going back to that moment of 1982, what happened was, as far as I understand it, that lots of people from the theatre world came to those performances, and it made a huge impact on the theatre profession as well as the dance profession.
Yes, I mean, I'd never seen an audience that combined people from the visual arts, the theatre, music, I mean, across the board, really. But what you got after Pina Bausch had been to London was a load of shows at Riverside Studios and the ICA that featured chairs on stage. And now there are companies that I see in different parts of the world who don't even know they're influenced by Pina Bausch.
Just on the 1982, there's another story I've heard, is that there was an issue with the Musicians' Union because there was music in the show, and at the time, if you had to use musicians, but they put a string quartet in the foyer or in a tent or something.
Pina always used tape for the soundtracks for her shows, not to cut corners, but she liked the kind of feeling of the past that a crackling recording evoked. That wasn't good enough for Musicians' Union, so the way it was solved was that a string quartet played in the lobby. Yeah. So that the musicians were paid, even though they weren't paid to perform the soundtrack for the show.
I often wonder what they played. Whether
remember.
They just played a number of different.
I can't remember. We thought they were buskers at the time. We thought we weren't sure what they were doing there. But I mean, the show was about 3 hours long. It featured a real lawn with a stuffed deer, and I'd never seen a piece of theatre, which it was theatre really, that was drawing on the performers' own emotional and family histories. The performers collaborated with Pina. She just used to ask them questions, and they answered sometimes in words and sometimes by movement. And she edited all this footage together into these amazingly structured works.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely a new way of working. This Tanztheater, they called it. And yeah, starting with the performers not having a narrative at all, but a kind of narrative which comes from them. And then scenes which are just sort of like little vignettes, really. And, you know, there's many of them through the pieces. And sometimes they don't really make sense until you get to the end of the piece.
Well, they have a sort of logic of a dream, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
they do.
You go into a kind of dream state. I mean, she really drew on the unconscious memories of her performers. I mean, I remember when I kind of stalked her for about 5 years because I was determined to work with her.
Yeah.
And it took about 5 years before I found somebody who would introduce me to her, so I could pop the question, why haven't you been in London since 1982?
Yeah.
And the first time I met her was through someone who mentored me, a guy called Harvey Lichtenstein at the BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York, who presented Pina's work in the way that Sadler's Wells now does every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I met her, and as you remember, she wasn't somebody who made it easy for you to talk to her.
Not really.
She hated talking.
Yeah, she never talked to her. Only once did she ever explain anything in her work.
She just didn't explain it to the dancers either.
No.
She never explained it to press or anyone. But I said to her, Pina, I've realised that you were born in 1940 in North Rhine-Westphalia in Solingen, which was being bombed between 1940 and 1945. When you were 5, you must, do you remember the bombs? And she said, well, we were in a shelter in my parents' cafe. They owned a cafe, and all the neighbours would come. And when the bombs came, we'd go down to the cellar, and I'd hide under the table, and I'd peep out at the adults between the folds of a tablecloth, and I'd see them getting drunk. I'd see them behaving like children. I said, well, that's where your work comes from. And she said, I don't think so. I don't think it's got anything to do with my childhood.
Yes.
So I realised that I should never really mention it again.
No. But it definitely did, didn't it? And the piece that came out of that particular scene is Café Muller, which is one of the earliest pieces I saw as well.
That was the first piece that I was involved in presenting. We decided to go to Edinburgh to make the appetite in London even more kind of intense. So we went to Edinburgh with Café Muller, which is a piece which takes place in a cafe, revolving doors, and Pina herself is in the show, and she plays a blind dancer who is sleepwalking through the cafe, and the rest of the company are trying to move chairs and tables frantically so that she doesn't trip up. It's all played out to Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. It's very, very beautiful.
It is, and going back to that thing about the subconscious, it's the one which is most dreamlike. It is a dream, basically.
It is a dream. It's the dream of the dancer who can't see.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And she'd never performed it on its own. It's usually, as you know, done in a double bill with Rite of Spring. Yeah. But we couldn't afford the Rite of Spring.
No, right, okay. So you just did Café Muller.
We just did Café Muller, which was 50 minutes, ideal for a festival. Yeah. And it was very successful. People came up from London to see it, which the Edinburgh Festival loved, because they're always wanting to do things that you can't see in London. Yeah. And it was a great event. We went to Cayley's in the evening. Pina very proudly went shopping down the Royal Mile and said she found the only black kilt on the Royal Mile. I've got some wonderful photographs of her dancing the Dashing White Sergeant and Strip the Willow, and it was just wonderful. And she loved being in Edinburgh. But she was very funny as well.
She was very funny and very sociable as well.
Very. Once you relaxed with her and realised that she didn't really want to talk about her work. She talked about anything else. But that was really sort of crossing a line.
So we've just seen Café Muller again, and the point is, you said people loved it. It's still quite hard work. I mean, it's not an easy experience, and and it's so amazing that even now it looks so kind of out there as theatre, and yet this is like 30 years on, 40 years on from the...
I think almost 50 years.
Almost 50 years on.
It was...
So how it was received then, obviously it was difficult in those early days, going back to before even when she started at Wuppertal, people really did walk out.
They walked out, they slammed the door, they shouted, they spat at her in the street. I mean, it was shocking. Yeah. Now, the reverence... that you can't get tickets, and it's somehow she stuck to what she wanted to say about humanity, And I think what she wanted to say was actually not really very easy to accept.
Yeah.
Though she was not an intellectual, she never read Carl Jung or anything like that. She wanted to reflect the dark side of humanity as well as the joy.
Yeah.
And the piece is a great combination between the delight in being human and the fact that we're all going to die.
Yeah. Going back to those early pieces, and you're saying this sense of like the darkness as well. I think it did come out of that time in post-war Germany. There was lots of, Antal Kiefer, Günter Grass, all these artists, and they were dealing with this issue, and she dealt with it, I think, in her own way. I mean, not in a political way, but there were things going on there which probably came from a bit of trauma in that time.
I'm sure that's right. I mean, it's something that hasn't been written about much in Germany, apart from by the great writer W.G. Sebald, who's a German writer who wrote in German in England. He was attached to the University of Norwich. Not known so much in Germany, but he wrote about the aftermath of the war in North Rhine-Westphalia when the place was flattened unnecessarily by the British and the Americans. And that must have been terrible trauma.
Yeah. Yes, and also the guilt of what had happened, the generation before and all those things. And, not many people speak about that, but I think that was a big influence, I think. And Pina would never, ever discuss that, of course.
Everything was implicit.
Yes.
There was never any explicit criticism or the reason the works stand the test of time is there's nothing dated about them, because she never talked about contemporary politics.
No, that's right.
It was always general kind of observations about humanity that were true in the 1970s as they are now.
Yeah.
There's something fundamental about the way humans behave that doesn't change.
Yeah.
And she understood that.
So just going back to the chronology, so then how many times did you present the company in Edinburgh after that?
3.
Yeah.
We did Nelken, and then we did Iphigenie, which is a piece with an orchestra and singers.
Yeah.
One of the pure choreographic pieces that because we hadn't, in showing Café Muller and Nelken, it's just the theatrical pieces.
Yeah.
We wanted to show what a great choreographer she was. In fact, actually, in 1976, John Drummond, the director of the Edinburgh Festival then, I was far too young to have heard of Pina Bausch, but she came and presented Right to Spring.
Right,
in Edinburgh.
Before,
And that credit should be given to that early understanding of her talent, because Rite of Spring has been done over and over again, and it's still the greatest piece of choreography I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, it is, particularly to that score,
The Stravinsky score, which in itself was ahead of its time, and when it was presented in Paris, I think, at the Garnier, people walked out with...
that caused a riot, famously.
Yeah. So, but then it was time to come to London, and we were waiting for the Sadler's Wells Theatre to be rebuilt, so the stage was big enough to fit the company. So in 1999, she came with a piece called Victor.
That's where I came in.
Which was an amazing... we did something during Victor, which we tried to do every time she came, which was to, in the daytime, introduce her to other artists. So that there's a videotape of her in Sadler's Wells mezzanine, talking to young visual artists, young musicians, just interested and intrigued and curious to hear what it's like for them. I think Fiona Shaw, who lived down the road from Sadler's Wells, hosted a party where there was people like Alan Rickman, Anthony Gormley, Simon McBurney, lots of people who had watched Pina's work but had never met her. Katie Mitchell, I think, was there. And it was a wonderful time. She loved the sort of socialising after the show.
She certainly did.
There was always a good glass of red wine.
We were always exhausted by the end of the seasons.
It was
because you'll be somewhere else at 4 a.m. In the morning each night. And the most famous occasion was when I remember is when we were at the German ambassador's residence, and she stayed and stayed and stayed. Everyone was gradually leaving, and the ambassador actually came downstairs in his coat because he had to walk his dog. And she said, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't realise we were here so late.
But
she had a great energy.
Incredible stamina. Was always the last one to leave the table. So, my memories of her will be those kinds of moments where she was quite childlike, I think. She was quite mischievous. which you see in the work as well.
Yeah. Just keeping to the chronology, though, because I think that so we did present every year around the springtime, but then we talked to Pina because we were coming up to the Olympics in London 2012. We approached Pina, didn't we, with a couple of ideas.
In Paris.
Yes.
At that cafe that she used to like next to the Teatro de la Ville.
Yeah. Awful cafe.
Awful cafe,
terrible
but
food.
She loved it.
Yes.
So we talked to her about, the Olympics in relation to the international co-productions that she'd made with different world cities. I think the first one was probably Palermo. Mm-hmm. What the company used to do is they'd go to a city for 3 weeks at the invitation of the host who was co-producing. They would soak in the atmosphere of the city. They'd go back to Wuppertal and make a piece that was sort of inspired by the experience. But these were very far from travelogues. I mean, unless you knew that it was Palermo in the title, Palermo. It was to do with the Palermo that existed in her mind, the internal Palermo.
It did have some connection. With that particular piece, what happens is that at the very beginning, there's a wall that covers the proscenium, and everyone's sitting waiting for the show to happen, and gradually they see that the wall starts to fall down, and there's this incredible explosion of concrete and stone. And then you get this layering on the stage of all this rubbish, and the dancers then continue to perform, and that's what it's like in Palermo, because everything is falling apart.
Well, including when she premiered in Palermo, the wall falling down actually broke the stage.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And they're also in Palermo. You quite often see people wheeling strange shopping trolleys. Like I once saw someone wheeling a shopping trolley full of alarm clocks, and there's quite a bit of that. This kind of incongruity and surrealism in the Palermo piece. But I think that we chose 10 pieces that existed.
No, you're losing the chronology here. So we made one suggestion.
We did make
about the co-production. Remember
Africa? Yeah,
there hadn't been. There'd been all these co-productions from mostly European countries, but from Chile as well, and later on. There'd never been an African co-production, so we said, well, we would fund it, so we would make it sure that they would go to somewhere. And there's this place called Echo de Sadler in Senegal, and Jermaine Akongli runs it, and we said that they can be the kind of host. So we were going to go to Senegal that autumn.
To Dakar.
And
right.
Pina then started not feeling so well. I don't think it was connected to the eventual reason for her death, but she wasn't so great, so she said she couldn't go. And then we met her again, and she said instead of that, you should bring all the co-productions.
It was her idea. I'd forgotten that.
Yes, yeah.
Bring all the co-productions, and I think she never thought it would happen.
Yeah.
But it was the last project before she died that we actually plotted together.
Yeah, with her, that's right.
With her.
Yeah.
And there was something very special about the success of it, because it sort of shuttled between Sadler's Wells and the Barbican.
Yeah.
When Sadler's Wells was setting up for the next co-production, the Barbican was presenting another one.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was kind of mad.
It was huge. There were 50 trucks of material crossing from us to Wuppertal. We would never be able to do that now with the climate change issues, but we did it at the time, and it was incredible. It was the most extraordinary thing, absolutely exhausting. But as you say, it happened after Pina died, it felt like a real strong legacy moment.
It was 3 years after she died.
Yeah. When I heard about her death, actually, I was in Montpellier at the dance festival there, and Bill Forsyth, another great choreographer, rang me in my hotel room and said that Pina had just died, and I didn't realise up until that point how much she meant to me, actually. Yeah. In those years, she became a friend.
Absolutely.
Totally, and that's really wonderful thing, because, someone that you looked up to as some kind of god, then you start to get to know personally and build a relationship. We did, didn't we?
We did, and she died so quickly that there was no chance for us to say our goodbyes. The company were away in Poland. She said, I think at the weekend when they left, she said that she wouldn't come with them. She wasn't feeling great.
Yeah.
And she was admitted to hospital the same day, and she died 2 days later.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a long illness. She hated going for checkups.
Yes.
She smoked like a chimney.
Yes.
I mean, famously in Los Angeles, they created some sort of spacesuit for her, so she could smoke in the auditorium while she was doing a lighting session.
Well, do you
she was like
remember?
in a sort of bubble.
We were in. She also had a little incident when she was at Sadler's Wells once. It turned out to be a bit of it. She was anemic, but we had to take her to a private hospital, and she spent a couple of days there. And she luckily had a balcony, and she wheeled out her drip onto the balcony with smoke, and say to us, "Just make sure the nurses aren't coming." You know, she just couldn't stop. She was a champion smoker.
She was extraordinary. I mean, I've never known anyone who smoked as much as Pina.
No, it literally,
it was like a sort of sixth digit on her hand.
It
right
was,
hand.
yes. It was literally chain smoking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She actually almost made me want to take up smoking. Meals that you and I would have with Pina.
Yeah.
Some of the company used to come along, some others used to come along.
Yeah.
But and those will be my memories of the sort of the what, not so much what happened on stage,
Yes.
but what happened off stage.
Yeah.
And
the red wine.
And thank you for all those years of travel.
It's been a pleasure, hasn't it?
It's been a hugely important part of my life, actually.
Yeah.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.